What we call keywords are a really critical aspect of MLA citation because it essentially tells the audience what source this particular piece of information comes from. So recognize first that when we're citing, we are not just citing quotations, we're citing anything that comes from any other author, whether it's a specific set of words, or if we've changed the words and we're using the idea, it could be a general idea that we've taken from an entire text that we want to bring in, that we're summarizing. And remember that that while it might seem really cool to be like, hey, I came up with this idea and I'm just going to move the words around, that is plagiarism if we're taking any ideas from anywhere else. But also, and this is far more important, you look a lot smarter when you have done the research and you can show your audience that you've done the research and actually taken it from people who might have more concrete ethos, more credibility in that particular realm than you might have. So it actually makes your work better to have cited things and to avoid accidental or on purpose plagiarism. Not that anybody would be doing that on purpose. So the keyword is a word in your essay, in your whatever it is that you're writing, that matches the first word, the word along the left-hand column in your work cited. And that lets your audience match. So they can be like, okay, here's the word that somebody has keyed me into that in the text, that now I can go and look at that works cited page and I don't have to search that works cited page. It's going to be against that left-hand margin. And so here you can see that these are against the left-hand margin. We've got Silko and Miller. And then you'll notice that down here for this next one, for Black boys are the least likely of any group to escape poverty, you'll notice that there is not an author because The Economist doesn't publish them. We have any number of things that may not have an author that we would just skip that part and go to the next. I've also included the Dalai Lama, which is not a first name, last name, but rather a title, but it is what he goes by. And so we can see that for that final one, we would have dropped the and just used Dalai Lama as the keyword. So recognizing that they would be very, very easy for your audience to match that up from somewhere in your paragraphs above and match that directly to the left-hand margin. Imagine if we were looking at something that was like, oh, this thing from The Lion's Roar, and we might have to like, if this were a 2-page works cited, it might take a long time to figure out that that piece actually comes from the Dalai Lama. So we want to make this as easy as possible for your audience to be able to recognize that. And that's why the MLA has established that rule, that it is that the keyword, the word that we are going to either put parenthetically or lead in with, is going to go up against that left-hand margin. So let's take a look at how that would look when it's a lead-in. And here it says the Dalai Lama wants the human race to spend its infinite time on earth pursuing the meaningful life enriched by a sense of connection with and service towards each other. And so we ask ourselves, why is there no parenthetical citation? And if we were to go back to the last, to that works cited page, we would find that that comes from a URL, an online source. So there is that never-ending scroll, which means that that my page 2 might not be the same as your page 2 when you print it, or I might not have printed it at all. And so your page 3 would just be like, I wonder where that might fall. So we don't need any page numbers there. In fact, we wouldn't want any page numbers there because it would be misleading. But here, the Dalai Lama, I could go directly to that works cited page and find that very, very quickly because I would even know what letter to look under. I would look under D for Dalai Lama. And so here's how it looks as a in-text citation, a parenthetical citation, where the information is essentially the same, but instead of leading in with it, I've put it in parentheses at the end. And you'll notice that we would never do that twice. That's in different MLA rules. We either lead in or we put it at the end, but we do want to make sure every single time that the context is absolutely clear, that there's never a question as to where that information came from. Sometimes you might might have two sentences in a row that, that come from the same source, and it might be very, very clear that they're connected. As long as your language connects them, you might not need to have a citation in both of those sentences, but you do want to make sure that it's absolutely clear when you've taken something from some other source where exactly that comes from. And that's the key to all citations. The answer to all citations is the source clear, and can I make it clearer without being redundant? So here's another lead-in with a paraphrase rather than a quote. So here we've got Henry David Thoreau. And so yes, we've used the author's full name here, but I know as somebody reading academically that I'm going to look for that author's last name on a works cited page. And you'll notice that this is a general idea that Thoreau has. It's not a quote. It's not even a paraphrase. It's a general idea that he has that does show up on that page 384. And I'd be like, well, I wonder what source that's from, and I would actually have to go to that works cited page to find out, oh, it's from a textbook, and this excerpt from this particular essay by Henry David Thoreau, and then I would be able to find that more concretely. So here, if I wanted to say, take that idea and didn't want to focus on the fact that Henry David Thoreau said that, and wanted to instead highlight the content rather than the author, then I might put my keyword, my Thoreau, in my parenthetical citation instead, and that would just give us the focus on the fact that civil disobedience is necessary, and without it the world would be in shambles. It sounds like then I'm incorporating that idea into my work, and it is less disruptive with that other attribution. So it's a matter of focus where you would choose to put that. Do you want the focus on Henry David Thoreau, or do you want the focus on the idea? And so that's where you would choose which way to do it. So what happens when we get a little bit more complicated? What follows here for the rest of this is when we get more complicated into this. So what if we have two works that we're dealing with that are by the same author? Then theoretically, that first word in the left-hand column on your works cited page would be exactly the same. So that would get really confusing to just cite Miller if I was dealing with both The Crucible and A Death of a Salesman. And so yes, my context can make that clear, and ideally that's what I do. But if I'm not going to do that with my context, then I have to think about the fact that there might be actually two keywords. One that locks us into the left-hand margin of that works cited page, and then a second keyword that tells us the first thing that's different between those two entries. So I will tell you that the easiest way to deal with it is by leading in with the full and appropriate context. So let's take a look at how this looks. If we've got two works by Edgar Allan Poe, one is a short story called The Masque of the Red Death, and one is The Fall of the House of Usher. The first word, if we take that across, they're both Poe, Edgar Allan, the. And so the first word that's different would be mask and fall. So those would be the key words. We might also do sometimes a key phrase. So you want to do the first meaningful section. You don't have to, you could use the whole thing, but it's, the MLA suggests that we shorten it so that it's just a quick glance from one place to the other, unless we're putting it in the context. So here you'll notice that we're putting it with the context. So we're not going to abbreviate just with fall and mask. We're actually going to use the full title and the author's name as the lead-in. So in The Fall of the House of Usher, Poe creates a sense of foreboding as the narrator considers the black tarn. Then we have our page number that follows. And then somewhere else, so anytime that I referred to that one, I would have to be clear that it's from The Fall of the House of Usher rather than from The Masque of the Red Death. I can't just say, Poe talks about a black tarn, because I wouldn't know which of the pieces from the works cited list that Poe was pointing me toward. Then we've got the voluptuous scene of the party contrasts with the stark reality of the Red Death in Poe's The Masque of the Red Death. And so there again, we're including the full context. I obviously here, the first time I would have dealt with either of these Poes, I would have introduced the author's full name with an Edgar Allan Poe, and then thereafter I would just use Poe. So here, if we take a look at it without that lead-in, how we would do it, and again, this would just shift the focus. And so this is a choice, a stylistic choice, is what do we want to focus on? Is it where it comes from and how he's dealing with it in different places, or are we dealing with just the stylistic ideas that Poe generally uses, but I want to tell you where I've gotten that from. So here, this is where you see it in a parenthetical citation at the end, where I would actually need both keywords in that parenthetical citation. Since I haven't brought in Edgar Allan Poe or the title of the work in either of these sentences, then I would need Poe to tell us exactly where on that works cited list I'm going to look, and then I'll have 2 or more Poe works, so then I need those first words. So fall is my second keyword for the Fall of the House of Usher, and mask would be my keyword for the Mask of the Red Death. Notice that those titles, if it's a keyword that's a title, that they have to follow the title rules that exist below. So if I were dealing with a full-length piece from someone, if I were dealing with Arthur Miller and I was dealing with The Crucible and I was dealing with Death of a Salesman, then I would need italicized titles because those are longer works. So I'm always going to follow the same title rules that exist on my works cited page as well. Anything that I see on the works cited, it should appear the same way in the body of my text. So here's that last, I'm making it even more complicated here. Just as we get more sophisticated, we can consider how these things might work in. If you're still way back on step 1, you can just ignore this and that's fine. But if we were to put this in the same sentence, how would we cite this? If we weren't going to lead in, because it can get very, very wordy if I do that. So here, I would say Poe's protagonist can be scared of a black tarn in some cases. And so since I don't want to focus in on all of the, on just the Fall of the House of Usher, I just want it to be, it's in some cases, then I parenthetically cite fall, because I already have my other keyword at the beginning of this sentence, Poe. So then I don't need Poe there, it would be redundant. And then I have fall and page number, or in others, he may be compelled by a voluptuous scene. So then I've got that comparison of settings all in one sentence, but I have attributed it to 2 separate stories, both by that first keyword, Poe. So then I would know as a reader that first I'm going to look at Poe, and then I'm going to find fall, and I'm going to find mask in order to find those things, those quotations, or the original sources for these. Now, the reason that I have a parenthetical citation in the middle of my sentence here is because the MLA favors the citation as close to the quotation as possible without interrupting the flow of the sentence. So in order for that to work, I have to find the first break in the sentence, which would be in this case a comma or. Because there's a comma there is a natural break in the sentence, so I can use that comma to throw my parenthetical citation in there. If you look at the second sentence, I've restructured the sentence so it doesn't have 2 independent clauses where the or is connecting 2 independent clauses, which means that it needs a comma. Instead, I have a full sentence that doesn't have any break in the middle, where I've got Poe creates shifting moods using settings like a black tarn or a voluptuous scene, depending on the disparate purpose of his stories. Then I have to have both of my second keywords in my parenthetical citation. So that would tell the reader that the first quotation, that black tarn, comes from Poe and a title that's going to come from fall. And then the second one, connected by that comma, is going to come from first keyword post, second keyword mask. So that's how I would find those on my works cited list. So the key here is thinking about how you can create the context and those visual markers that make it as clear and easy for your audience as possible to know where your borrowed material comes from and to match that up quickly and easily to your works cited page.